Welcome to Season 2 of Grey Maybe, a limited series podcast and social experiment based on this season's topic, the body. My name is Jillian Schmitz. I'm a professional dancer, actor, teacher, author, artist, and cat lover. Through my own personal journey of recovery, I've found that things aren't just black or white, or as simple as yes or no. For me, in my recovery, there has been mostly gray area and a lot of maybes. In most of my stories, you can find the gray maybe. I will be sharing my own process through personal stories, interviews, and hopefully stories from listeners in an effort to help lessen the stigma and shame of disordered eating disorders, and body image. If you'd like to share your story of ED recovery on this podcast, anonymous or otherwise, please email greymaybestories@gmail.com. greymaybestories@gmail.com. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're using to catch future episodes of Grey Maybe. A note before we begin. The topic of disordered eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and other behavior related to the body may not be difficult for me to share anymore, but it wasn't always this way. I recognize and anticipate the possibility of judgment or disbelief about my experiences, ranging from my own family members to strangers, in addition to the potentiality of losing certain opportunities for publicizing my own experiences. My stories and the stories of others on this podcast are told through the lens of our own experience. The revelation of our process is ours to tell. If you disagree with the views or stories on this podcast, know that we are not speaking on anything other than our own experiences and viewpoints. Take what you like and leave the rest. Nothing expressed or mentioned in this podcast is an endorsement or is meant to be taken as suggestion or advice. It is strictly the sharing of our own experiences and recovery. Any feelings this podcast activates in the listener is for the listener to process and recover from. Any criticism you have based on these experiences and choices are yours, and they are not anyone else's burden to carry. Trigger warning: eating disorders, disordered eating, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, binging, purging, restriction, anorexia, bulimia, weight loss and gain, fat phobia, racism, quote unquote, the term ballet body. Welcome back, everybody, to the Grey Maybe podcast. Thank you so much for coming back. If you keep coming back, thank you. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm so glad you found the podcast, and I hope you check out some of the other episodes. Today is a great episode to tune into if this is your first time. I have a very, very lovely lady with me. I met this lady in a not so lovely experience for myself. I won't speak for everyone, but I met her on a job that we did in China for the lovely Keith and Sharon Young. They are lovely choreographers. The job was a very cool job, but being in China was not so great for me for a lot of reasons. So I met this lovely, amazing lady on that job, and I've kind of kept tabs on her ever since. If you have been noticing what's going on in the Broadway world right now, she was just the associate choreographer on Sweeney Todd, the musical, and also is working with the Harry Potter that is on Broadway right now. And I mean, she's had like an exceptional career, but and she will tell me more about that and correct anything that I might not have said. But I would love to introduce Chelsey Arce to the Grey Maybe podcast. Chelsey.
Oh, Jillian, thanks for having me. No, all of that is correct. I am, just opened Sweeney Todd 2 weeks ago with Josh Groban and Annalie Ashford starring. And it's kind of a huge success, which is amazing, but also really wild to be in New York and have that all happening. And then I jumped right back into Harry Potter as the movement captain and swing over at Harry Potter and the Cursed Child on Broadway. So
yes. You are busy.
Yes, wands and blades, like bouncing back and forth, yeah.
Yes, and you're especially busy because today is a Monday, and for those of you who don't know, in the theatrical world, this is what's considered a dark day, which is a day that most shows are not running. So this is like your guaranteed kind of day off to like do everything you need to do and get everything together, and sometimes go see other shows that might still be running on a Monday, all that kind of stuff. But it's typically your one day off.
Yeah, I am actually going to see New York tonight. So they have a Monday show. So that's what I'm going to go see after I.
Amazing, yeah, and there's a few shows that do, but it's just not quite as common, at least
Yes,
from when I've.
that's really
Yes.
correct.
Now, Chelsey and I met on a job in China. It was a very hard job for me for a lot of reasons, injury stuff, just not able, culture shock, a lot of culture shock. I've been a lot of places, but that was definitely a culture shock. And the food there was hard for me for a lot of reasons. I don't know if you had the same experience. But I do recall one of the first things I learned about you, or at least one of the things that really stuck in my head, but then I completely shelved. Like it was very, it's interesting how I categorize this based on where I was at the time of hearing that information. So one of the things I learned about you early on was you talked about having an eating disorder, and you talked about it like it was, oh yes, I live in New York, and I have an eating disorder, and I'm going to go here for lunch. Like it was just so matter of fact. And I remember holding that in my brain and being like, huh, how, how, okay. Didn't have a lot of experience with people being upfront or out about something like that. And then to say it so casually and not have, it kind of swirled around in my head a while. And then I compartmentalized it because I had, was in my own weird ass stuff with food, but because I didn't think I qualified, there was no intersection of what you were saying and my experience. And it almost like, I almost compartmentalized it so that I don't know, so that I wouldn't have to be alike in that way. I don't know. It was very weird what I did in my mind about that.
Yeah, I think I've also experienced that exact like intersection and decided to like make a U-turn back around with other people in my life that maybe had experienced an eating disorder in whatever capacity that they had. But I remember feeling like that's not what I have. And it may not have been what I had or what you had or what anybody who like has that intersection has. But like there's definitely, I have a relationship with food that is just not comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I realized previous to meeting you and probably other people that like I remembered that intersection with somebody who I was like, oh, no, that's not me. But it felt like, but it made me feel kind of way. But I didn't know what it was.
And I remembered it. It bookmarked in my brain. And it wasn't even until like in doing this season of the podcast that I was like, okay, who do I know? Like, who would be maybe willing to come on? Who would be willing to talk about this? I know so many dancers. I know so many people in the industry that have to be suffering, but I know so few people who are out. And it took me so long to even think of you because I had put it so far back in my brain. And when, like, I remembered Kat Tokarts because right when I was starting to get help, she was being out about her situation. Mm-hmm. So I was like, her. But like when I really thought about it, I had heard yours and threw it in the back closet because I probably was nowhere near ready to deal with any of it.
Sure.
So can I ask you, like, when do you think it began for you? Like, was there anything you can recall? Some of the like early stuff, like, because some people go to like when they're started their behavior, and some people are like, oh, when I was 3, I remember this, or some things like that leads up to, and then there's like behavior, or some people are just like, when my body started changing at puberty, that was the taking off point.
Yeah, this is a really, it's very specific. I actually remember the first day that I was like, I'm going to engage in something that not everybody does every day, but prior to that, because I had been a gymnast, I was like 5'2" until I was probably about 15 or 16, and had decided to dance because I wasn't going to do competitive gymnastics anymore. So joined ballet, started taking ballet classes. Of course, I have like this tiny little athletic body, and like in gymnastics, it was like, muscles, everything. Like, there was no body fat. Start ballet, and I start to grow. And I, like, my junior year of high school, I was 5'7" all of a sudden, and I weighed 98 pounds. Like, the size I was, the number, when I was 5'2", I was now 5'7". And everybody in the entire world was like, oh, you have the best ballerina body. Like, it was like the facility, and it was just like, eat it all up. Like, it was like the most amazing. And like, so then it became this obsession, right? Like, how do I keep this 5'7" body? And I became obsessed with the number 98, right? Like, that was all I could remember, because it was like, it can't possibly mean that my weight will change if I am tall now and I can stay thin. And I remember that being like the turning point, because everybody was just so complimentary. It was like, you can go to SAB, you can go to ABT, you have the perfect ballet body. And there's this really fucked up book in ballet culture, and I remember it was in college. It also is part of the pedagogy program. Anyways, it's probably not, it doesn't exist anymore, but it's a book in which it defines every like ballet step. It's like a ballet encyclopedia, and it has a picture of a dancer's body inside, and like kind of gives you an idea of, because I remember asking my dance teacher, like, how much should I weigh? And she couldn't answer that question. That's like an absurd question. Also, like, what do you say to a 15-year-old who you're like, clearly this is a disaster of a question. But she showed me this book. And the book, and I remember looking at it, it had like, like arched feet should look like this. And like, fingers should be long, and like arms should be open, and like neck is long, and like, all these things. And then it had height. And it had a height like 5'2" to like 5'9". And then underneath the height, it said like 85 to 110, or some ridiculous number. So then in my brain, I realized it was like in 5-pound increments. Like, whatever the numbers were, I did the math, because that's how my brain works. And I was like, if you are 5'2", you must weigh 85 pounds. If you are 5'3", you weigh 90 pounds. And so I became obsessed, thinking that if I was 5'7", I had to weigh, like 105 pounds, or whatever it became equivalent to. And so it just became a disaster. But that was the beginning of a very, very long road. It was not, I would eat anything that I could see prior to ballet.
Okay, and so that kind of like that idea of I need to weigh a certain low weight directly translated into like a food situation. You were already, like before that, you were like, just eat whatever. And now it was like, okay, wait, if I have to weigh this.
Yeah, it was the only way I saw it working. There was like, at that time, dancers weren't cross-training. It was like not an athletic thing. It was like you wanted to be dainty and feather-like, and which is like the complete opposite of today, right? So it was, how much can you not eat in order to do ballet class?
Right.
And I remember drinking tons of orange juice. Like, on a Saturday morning, I would take like a big jug of orange juice, and because it had enough vitamins and it had enough sugar, but not like Coke sugar, it was like enough natural sugar to like get me through all my ballet class, or at least make me feel like I was doing something. So yeah, the number became the thing of why I became obsessed with food. I
did the orange juice thing as well. I did that in my second year of training out here. I had a show, like my end of the year kind of show, like kind of like a scholarship end of the year show, right? And my schedule was so jam packed. In between my classes, I had rehearsals for all the numbers I was in, and I was in all the numbers. And so every second was rehearsal or class. And I used that schedule as an excuse to not eat. But I had that like orange juice in the fridge. And it was like not even good orange juice. It was like orange juice you get at like the 7-Eleven, Chelsey. It was like worse than Tang.
Yeah,
it was
amazing.
Like I don't even know what it was. It had orange juice on the outside, but it's in like the jug, and it was like not.
Yeah, the plastic jug that doesn't have anything in it.
Sugar.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it was sugar water. It was sugar water. So I was just like chugging that in between, like thinking, like, oh yeah, I'm doing it. And then I would go home and like eat whatever I wanted, which never ended up being even that much because my stomach wasn't even that big anymore to be able to eat
Yeah.
anything, but it would just like to me I was kind of like, oh, this is great, I can eat whatever I want
Yeah. Well,
and still be super skinny.
that's the thing, right? That also happens. Is like when I wasn't in front of people, it would be a thing of like, well, then I'll do it now because I did the thing that I needed to do. I got through being in front of a mirror and I feel good now, so now I can do that. And it just became this cycle, right? Because like the next day I didn't want to do it, but you would do it again. And it was the easiest way to kind of wrap your brain around that emotionally. And then it just, that's the very beginning of a long story.
A long story. And I like in what you just said, I get the hint of like, well, I don't know if this is for you as well, like the rewarding of food. Like I would reward myself with food if I did certain things or got through. Like I would push off food, push off food, push off food, and then if I got everything done, and I just would keep creating tasks for myself, and then I would be like allowed to have the food at the end of the day, or allowed to have it if I did A, B, and C, and then of course I would punish myself with not having food for the rest of the time.
Yeah, I think for me, especially in New York, that became like I remember in college, the schedule for me was quite tricky because you don't want to do ballet on a full stomach, so that always was an easy excuse. And then you have an hour for lunch, and then you're going to go into modern and do like drop swings, and it's like I just can't possibly eat. So now it's 3 o'clock. You have an hour between your lib arts classes or whatever, and so you're going to have coffee and like a donut. Like it was like sugar and caffeine was the thing to ride off of. But what I went to an all girls Catholic high school, and so this idea of eating disorder lived so easily in high school. It was the easiest thing to hide. It was the easiest thing to be encouraged by. It was never a hard thing until I got to college, and then it was like, oh, you do that, and you're like
there you could see like a little bit of like outside,
yeah, totally, because
condemnation or something.
Absolutely, yeah. I think high school was very very easy, and there was a point where I hit a really low point in high school, and I remember we went on a family vacation and we went on a cruise, right? Like, and I had already done my summer program, like, it was fine. And I just ate so much. And I gained probably 15 pounds. Like, it was the heaviest I've ever been in my entire life. And I remember coming back after that vacation because it was just like pure, like, your body just reacted. And my dance teacher was like, you need to go see the nutritionist. And I was like, what? Because, like, body dysmorphia, I felt good because I was eating, but, like, my body didn't know what to do. So then I started working with a trainer early on, like a nutritionist in high school. And that was because, like, I think there was, like, a bit of control with parents. And, like, it was like, okay, there's something going on. And I actually got back to a really healthy weight. Like, it was like, she's in dancer shape again. And I could see that, like, you could do it through eating, but I also was training on top of doing dance class. But I think that all to say is, like, there is always, like, this. It was this until I got to New York and even past New York, and I think it's probably why I felt so comfortable in being like, yes, I have an eating disorder and I'm going to go eat over there.
Well, and I think it's interesting you mentioned the word control because the minute you said that you went to an all-girls Catholic high school, I was like, oh, well, there you have it. Like when children and adolescents, some of the few things they can control is when they go to the bathroom, usually, like when they actually, go to the bathroom or where they go to the bathroom, and also what you eat or what you deny to eat at a certain point. Those are kind of like the two things that kids and adolescents can control. So if you're going to an all-girls Catholic high school, I was raised Catholic, and I can't imagine a need to control in that kind of an atmosphere would be just ripe for that,
Right. Yeah, totally.
So you said, it's just kind of up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, with the different behaviors and stuff. So even though you got a dietitian, and you were able to kind of even out the yo-yo of that, did you take any of that with you, or did you just get sneakier, or did you ditch it because you're like, I know better?
Oh, I totally got sneakier. And that's totally, it was like, I'm fine. Like once I got back down to my weight, I think it got weird because like nobody who's 16 diets on like, counting, your proteins and stuff. Like it was like so ahead of the time, which I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't, can I swear on this thing?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So now looking back, I'm like, man, I wish I remembered what that was because it was such a well balanced. I remember certain days I could eat pasta, and I was like, I get to eat pasta? Like this is so weird, but like also
Mm-hmm.
everything was so plain. It's very much on what anybody who's trying to have a clean, healthy lifestyle is doing now, but
Mm-hmm.
it felt so restrictive at the time. So yeah, I started. That led me to going. I can have food. The control part still. Then I started binging and purging, and so that's where it became because I felt abnormal. The people noticing you not eating draws
Mm-hmm.
attention, and then you're like, I eat, and I can eat
Mm-hmm.
whatever I want, and still stay
Mm-hmm.
thin. So I switched gears. Like I could no longer handle the anorexia and the control within minimizing my food intake. In the social pressures got to me of how to do that. Like especially when I got into my later years in high school, and then definitely in college, it was the only way I was able to um, really keep tabs on my weight. And obviously, like if I looked back at pictures of myself, it was not doing anything that I thought it was. In my
Mm-hmm.
mind, it felt like I was staying in weight, but like you would just look at me and go, something's so wrong. And not because I was thin, and
Mm-hmm.
your body just, expands in a way that goes, help me. And
Mm-hmm.
that was the way where I got really sneaky.
I love that you're talking about the diversity of the dysfunction, and I'm finding that that's pretty typical. Everybody that I talk to has so much diversity in their behavior. So a lot of times I ask people like, what would you identify as? A lot of times if you go into like a program like OA, they have you identify when you say your name, much like an alcoholic would say, I'm Jillian and I'm an alcoholic. When you go to an OA program, you say, I'm Jillian and I'm an orthorexic, restricting, over exerciser, binger. You
Mm-hmm.
just like list your
Your
behaviors and
problems.
it changes. Yeah, and people would change their behaviors based on what they were going through. So if they were, came into the program and they were a binge eater, and as they went through the program, like they got some recovery, but then maybe they had a setback and they're like, now I'm going to add restricting because I found some solace. I found some solace in it, which isn't good for me, but like I'm recognizing that I do that. And I'm finding that for someone like me who really wants to put everything in a black and white category, hence the name of the podcast, Gray Maybe, like there's so much gray area and it's kept me from getting recovery and help. It's kept me from being healthier by thinking that I don't qualify because I am not one thing, or I didn't do all of the one thing, or I didn't do the worst of whatever in my head, what I think, whatever that is. And so I think it's like really much more common than I think anybody is discussing is how much gray there is in all the different behaviors that normally someone, if they start with one behavior, will usually go to a second, third, fourth, fifth kind of behavior and like may or may not even be really conscious of it at first. Sometimes it just kind of sneaks in and sometimes you're just really conscious of it and you're like, yeah, that's what I'm doing now. Um, but it's got to get difficult in college when a lot of young people, that's how they bond is they go grab coffee, they go get dinner. They're in like the mess hall that has like the food and you're ordering food late at night with friends and it's your first time on your own. So you're doing adult meal things with friends.
Yeah, I think that was probably the hardest part for me. And my best friends who are, they are still my best girlfriends to this day, were my roommates, and they knew the entire time. And we have had long conversations about it now, years past, but you know, they didn't want to get me kicked out of school because they knew this is what I love to do. They knew what it
Mm-hmm.
was I was supposed to do, but they didn't know what to do with the information because, like,
Right.
it's a weapon, right? Because in the wrong hands, like anything can get misdiagnosed, or it could be taken
Mm-hmm.
too seriously or not too seriously or whatever. So they kept my secret, and I love them for that because I
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't be where I am today. I know it was really stressful for them because they just saw me hurting myself every
Right. They
single
just
day.
felt like they were
Yeah,
enabling you, you know.
totally.
But at the same time, that could have been super detrimental to your trajectory.
1000%. Like, easily, I think about it. And, I think there was probably many other people um, in my school dealing with it. Actually, I think more theater people, more than the dancers. If I look back on who was doing what, you can kind of, it's funny, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you can tell, but like I can walk into a room and be like, you have an eating disorder, you have an
Yes.
it's like, ding, ding,
Yes.
ding, 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 ding.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's really like
Yes.
a sixth sense. And some people will be like, why would you say that? And I'm like, you just like mannerisms, I can tell by the way that they're
Yep.
looking at something. I can tell by the way that they're looking at other people. It's
Yep.
oftentimes like how I look at, people when I'm auditioning, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you can tell that somebody's not there, not present, and that's
Mm-hmm.
such a
Mm-hmm.
thing that comes along with it because those
Mm-hmm.
thoughts take over. And I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
for you, it became compulsive, and that whole
Mm-hmm.
thing turned into, a whole different thing that had nothing to do with eating because it was like
Mm-hmm.
the balancing of the scale of. I remember when I eventually graduated, and not eventually, I graduated on time, but like when I moved to New York, um, my first boyfriend in New York found out and outed me, and I was so mad at him. And
Uh-huh.
he told my mom, and my mom was, she's known, she just like never came to
Right. I
terms
was
with
gonna say,
it.
did I see? Yeah, she knew. He wasn't telling her anything she didn't know, but it was probably something she still didn't want to
She didn't want
address.
to, yeah. So then it was like, well, now we have to get help. And I was like,
Mm.
this is the biggest eye roll of the century. So, like I started seeing like a behavioral therapist because I actually never went to rehab, like per se, for it. And so I started out seeing a behavioral therapist for compulsion. And
Mm-hmm.
because mine had kind of morphed into like obsessive compulsive disorder
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
combined with bulimia. So it was like, oh, not only are you going to be bulimic binge, but you're going to count while you're doing it. So this is like becoming a thing that is infinite. It could just keep going because
Like a
yes,
ritual thing. Yeah, the
yeah,
rituals that
and
that people talk
it
about.
became really like it was no longer about the weight. It was about feeling in control and feeling safe or creating, whatever those rituals make you feel safe. And when you talk about it, it makes you feel crazy, but it is a very real thing. And now looking back, and this is all before I met you, and so like so coming to terms with it, knowing exactly what that is and all that it encompasses, it's really easy to say. And I think I wish more people would be honest with themselves about it because it's not an easy life. And if you knew somebody else was dealing with it, you'd be like, oh my God, let me just help you. Or let me go out to lunch
Mm-hmm.
with you so you don't have to be by yourself. Or
Mm-hmm.
whatever those things that like would be helpful. But it's funny when I do now as like a woman in her mid 30s, you look around and you go, oh man, how hard was that? And even seeing women our age, um,
Mm-hmm.
you walk into a room and you're like, that must be tough every day.
Right, right. Yeah, I definitely can sense who's got the issues, and it's always easy to see the ones that are showing symptoms externally, there because there's a certain look to
Totally.
that that is not, there. I don't want to get too into, breaking apart what people look like, but there is a certain look that you're just like, okay, that's it. And then but there's also the ones that don't look, quote unquote, like they have one, but you can pick them out because, just like you're saying, you can see how much they're looking in the mirror, you can see how much they're adjusting their clothes, you can see how much they're not present, and you can also, there's a certain type of personality type that you kind of touched on, that
Yeah.
is like usually like super type A, super responsible, super, you know, possibly even like really hardcore people pleasers, people who are striving for control, people who feel a lack of control, high anxiety, you know, depression, you know, and a lot of that stuff, like, you know, I would assume stems from traumatic stuff, or also is just like however your biology is made up of. And obsessive compulsive disorder is like literally, it is BFFs with eating disorders. I would liken to say that I don't know a lot of people who don't suffer from OCD, that people who have eating disorders that don't also have an OCD type trait. And I think that OCD gets like a very weird rap. I think people think it's like, oh, that picture's crooked. My OCD can't take it. It's like, no, 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 no. This is different. This is the inability to tolerate the lack of control.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing everything in your power and even imagined power to try to control, because you feel so out of control and the anxiety is crippling. There's also like, I think the a lot of times when people talk about BDD, body dysmorphic disorder, they think it's just like, oh, you see something that's not there. And usually they think, oh, it's just you see yourself as larger than you are. Yes, it's true. But there's also people who see themselves smaller than what they are, and they don't like that. There's also people who pick their nails till they bleed, like I do. If you want to know how anxious I am, take a look at my hands. You'll be able to tell exactly how anxious I am week to week based on how many cuticles I have ripped off and I'm like bleeding from. And also the picking of the skin.
Mm-hmm.
That is also something that happens with BDD. People yell at me all the time, don't pick your skin. Like, stop picking your skin. Like, I have friends that say this to me, and I'm like, it's a compulsion. And I don't think you understand when I say that, what a compulsion means is that I can't stop.
Yeah, that's actually I have a smile because there's a character in Sweeney Todd that it's such a small detail, but
that I'm typecast for.
You're typecast
Should I audition?
For, you should audition
okay,
for
perfect,
Joanna.
Perfect.
She has, it's a small detail. You're like in a house of 1,500, but every night she paints red on her cuticles because that is her thing, and it's her obsession, and it is her compulsion, and it's just like such a little full circle because it's a real thing, and these things have always existed. They exist in theater, they exist in real life, and I think storytelling, when you can bring real things into storytelling, it makes it feel a bit more relatable. Like if you saw her on the stage when you come to New York, you'll be like, yes, that is me. I understand that.
Like, there's my character.
Yeah.
There's my typecast. I found me.
The ingenue.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think they're almost like, I don't know if at some points with this disorder, dis-ease, however you want to classify it, like where that ends and where this begins, like where OCD ends and where the eating disorder begins, or where the eating disorder ends and OCD begins. Like, I think it's kind of all can be one big ball of that. So if you have an eating disorder, look into OCD. And if you have OCD, look into what the eating disorder stuff is. Like, we're legit, like the wealth of it, not just like the stereotypical things that people think or say, but like the real in-depthness of BDD or OCD and what some of those things and that behavior looks like. So if you had to identify, like even throughout, and I don't know if today you would even identify necessarily, but like, what would your identification be of your behavior? You mentioned restricting and you mentioned bulimia. Would that be kind of like?
I mean, I think like as of now, I will always say, I think the only fair way to say is like, I suffer from an eating disorder. It's not active in my life, it feels like, but to the people who do have addictions other than eating disorders, they will always be, an alcoholic or a drug addict. And I think when comparing the two qualities, side by side, it's just I'm not active right now, and
right.
It's very much in control. It doesn't take. Is it something I think about every day? 1000%.
Mm-hmm.
It's never, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it's ever not going to be part of my life, but it doesn't control my life in a way that it did. And I think, the real thing is, I think when you know that you can have a conversation about it without being embarrassed,
Mm-hmm.
and feel judged about it, because I think that's always a really true space of going, I'm good with whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not part of my life anymore. So I would say, yeah, it's there. She is always looming. She's
She's
always
dormant.
she
She's
she
dormant.
just
She's sleeping. She's
she's
hibernating.
hibernating right now, and that's
Yeah.
great. Live your best life, sleep it
Yeah.
away. But
Sleep
like,
it off, girl.
yeah, but it's. I think the thing that it is. I think about all the times that how it happened so early. It makes I I really imagine it being quite difficult going through as an adult and not knowing the things that
Mm-hmm.
I do know.
Mm-hmm.
Because dealing with these feelings that do come up and like the hint, and you're like, okay, girl, um, dealing with that in your mid 30s as somebody who may or may not be in a relationship, whatever, I can't imagine what a a train that must be on, and that could be really detrimental to you functioning in the world, and especially I can't. New York is such a social city. Same with LA.
Mm-hmm.
Anything. You're always going out to eat. You're always grabbing coffee. You're always having a meeting. You're always doing this, especially in the industry. And to not be able to do that and enjoy those moments because they're so fleeting. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there were so many things that I wasted. I can't imagine wasting any more time on it,
Mm-hmm.
and letting it kind of be the captain of the ship per se, that existed for so long.
Yeah, I think when my early 20s, when I was like, some of my worst, like, times with the eating disorder where I was like really completely just encompassed with it. Like I thought shit was bad then, but it's like as you get older, like shit doesn't get easier. You just either learn skills to deal with it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't get easier as your parents and your family ages. It doesn't get easier as relationships change or people around you pass away. It doesn't get easier when, certain dreams may not be coming true. It doesn't get like nothing gets easier as you get older. You just hopefully start to find ways to cope that aren't so abusive to the self if you have that kind of particular um, uh, ailment of turning things on yourself, like which so many people do. If you don't, good for you.
Good for
But
you.
I love that for you. But I just don't know a lot of people that that's not the deal, right? So, absolutely, 100%. You were you were so blessed. I don't even know if I never use that word even, but you were so fortunate to like in younger to be able to kind of like identify and work through it and be able to kind of find whatever you needed to kind of in the later part, not that you're in your later life, but to be able to continue to have success later and put that, have old girl, hibernating and not what I like to say, driving the bus while you
Yeah.
sit in the back being like, holy shit, where are we going? Um,
Yeah,
so
but I
what,
don't know about you, but like stress, the minute stress comes up,
mhm,
I think that's the first thing, right? That
yes,
you lean back into, um, and you just have to be like, no, that's not right. It's
yes,
exactly it. It's being an adult, and you have more resources. And I think, like you said, you don't have the excuse as a child to make some of the decisions that were quite
hmm
reckless. Um,
hmm
I also, this is a weird thing, but as we're talking about it, health has changed so much in the last 10
hmm
years, and like body
oh, that like people
positivity.
care about you being actually healthy.
Yeah, that. And like, I just like, you were like, you're so lucky you went through it when you were younger. I feel like kind of lucky. And I say that with like the weirdest grain of salt because it was like nobody wanted to talk about it. So it was just like
Hmm
under the radar. Like if I was going through that now, I feel like everybody would know my shit. And I don't know if I would be okay with that because I wouldn't be in the
hmm
same spot. Um,
right.
but it was like, we will not talk about this. She is
hmm
fine. Like, she may be 98 pounds. She is a beautiful ballerina. Like, you know what I mean? It was like,
hmm hmm
um, and so it kind of just like slipped under this weird radar. But like if any of those little things slipped in now, people would be like, "What's going on? Are you seeing a therapist?
Right.
Do you need to talk?" Yeah, like they would just be like ding 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 ding, like all these people around you willing to help, A, and
Right.
B, to provide resources. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just funny. And I don't know if I would want to be there now. I think that would be really
Right.
hard because it feels echoed in a way that I would not want the support. I didn't want the
That might have
support
been
from
too
anyone.
much attention on
Yeah,
you at the
exactly.
time. Like that kind of attention might have been too overwhelming for you to be able to have that process.
Yeah, I think also like that just things have changed with social media and like people want to see a journey. I wanted nobody seeing my journey.
Mm-hmm.
Don't want you on my journey. Do not
Mm-hmm.
come. Don't buy a ticket. I don't, and so it's like zero attention. Don't look at this journey. And now what's
Right.
weird about this full circle is like this is a journey. Like talking about it, like it's a
Mm-hmm.
20 year journey that like when I look back, I'm like, oh God, that's really old. But like at the same time, it's been 20 years. That's like a whole human being, and
Mm-hmm.
who has lived a life that had this thing just swirling around inside of it, and it still does.
And like when you talk about, looking back as that is now a journey, was there a moment that you recall was kind of like a rock bottom or like a moment where you did stop being sneaky and you decided to either really put forth any of the things you learned in therapy or like really was there something that freaked you out or
Yeah,
anything like that that kind of set you straight?
yeah. It was my ex boyfriend from college, and I remember he was like, "I can't do this with you," and I was like,
Hmm.
"What do you mean?" He was like, "You have to do this by yourself," and we broke up. We moved out from one another, and like it was like going to my own personal rehab because I lived by myself. I had to be responsible. I was going to therapy,
Hmm.
and it was like I realized that and I had to tell my mom. I had to confront my roommates from college. Like it was
Hmm.
my stuff was on blast to the people who
Right.
already knew it, but then I had to confront it in a very honest way that never would I want to confront that and admit to it. I just wanted you to know and not talk about it.
Hmm.
So that I would say that was a really big turning point because also it's like the very beginning of me living in New York City. It was like within the first year, and New York is cutthroat in a different way than LA is.
Hmm.
There's just different venues to go down, and lots of, in a way, you kind of have to, not to say you have to pick what you want to do, but there's so many options for dance, right? Like you could go
Hmm.
classical because there's plenty of
Hmm.
classical companies. You could go commercial. At that time, we were still doing music videos over here.
Hmm.
Um, you know, Theater, Broadway is totally different. Um, so I think it was a wake up call of like, if you don't get this together, something is somebody's going to find out that you don't want to find out, and that may be this industry is too small. That's, I mean,
Hmm.
ultimately what it always comes down to, and you kind of go, okay, now I feel comfortable because I've done the work. Anybody who listens to this knows who I am and has seen my work.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
they're not going to judge me based on that. But at the time when you're 20, you're a liability.
Oh,
You
for
know?
sure. And I think there's a reason why I haven't been able to really get any young people on the podcast is probably because I'm sure they're afraid to tarnish their reputation or that it might keep them from being hired. I mean, the fact of the matter is if you're in recovery or working towards recovery, I don't think you should ever have to be afraid of that. If you're actively in your addiction, yeah, I think that's something to very much be afraid of. I think it's like anything. I think it's like if you have a drug addiction, and you're not actively in rehab or you've gone through rehab or you're going to meetings or you're trying to get it under control, no one is going to want to hire you knowing that like if the job's in Vegas and you're going to go and you're going to have a problem, like no one wants to be like, oh shit, is so and so going to be up, till 5 a.m. before,
Absolutely.
but if you're in recovery, they're going to be like, yeah, I want to give them a shot. They've fallen on hard times. They're trying to better themselves. So I think like you're absolutely right. That inclination to know that someone's going to find out, but it's not going to be in me in recovery. Someone's going to find out that I'm out of control or that I don't
Exactly.
like that I have this issue and it is a liability for hiring me because I'm a wild card. And if I'm not focused on what I'm doing in my job, then no one like that's the whole point, right? Is that you're there to do a job. And if you can't focus to do it, that's not going to be a good hire. Um, okay, that's good. Okay, so he, instead of taking that moment as an abandonment and being like super freaked out and like, oh my God, now what am I going to do? And getting worse, it was like the catapult for you to actually get better on your own.
Yeah, 1000%. Yeah, it was
And I don't mean like getting better on your own in your little like you obviously were in therapy.
no,
Like
but
I want to
yeah,
be
it
clear,
was
people, you can't do this on your own. You do need some kind of support
totally.
system.
Yeah, and I was seeing a nutritionist. It was like, we're gonna do this, and like there was like a team that it just wasn't in like an outpatient program or in a specific rehab program. So, but it was certainly something that worked with my schedule and I would say, my willingness at the time and what I could um, digest, and it worked well.
So this is a question that I'm trying to figure out how to ask it.
I'll just ask it.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out a way to ask it. Okay, so in my experience and my perception of eating disorders and the awareness around it and the recovery around it, it to me it has seemed very white and very female centered.
Mhm.
Now, I have seen like I can count on one hand how many people of color I've seen in the rooms when I've gone into OA meetings. And I just don't know a ton of people who are black or brown or of other minorities than white. And it's very white and female. There's not even a lot of ton of men. And I've been lucky to have quite a few men on the podcast to talk about it. Again, they're all white men. And so like this, like, I guess my question is like, has that been your experience? Did you notice that? Like, how do you feel about being, a woman of color that is in a white recovery realm?
Yeah, it's funny. I noticed that too. I think it's this could be like a 5 hour long podcast because
Right. And also you're not the monolith. Like I know you're not responsible for
yeah,
women of color experience.
no, but it is. I often wonder, like, why is that? And because it's a disease. It's not. But then you go like, well, where does it come from? And how does this brew? And is it how people are raised and where they're raised? And is the chemical imbalance in your brain, right? And like, there's those things that you kind of go like, wait, what? How is it just always this specific group of people, or it seems that way? Because they don't think it
Mm-hmm.
actually is. But I will say, you're absolutely right. I could not think of a person of, color that has had the same experience with me. I have friends who have dieted, but not in a way where it's like we are on two different levels. You know what I mean? Like that's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I, I don't know. And, I think for me, it's mind boggling. It really is. And I wish I had a better answer because it blows my mind.
I mean, I don't think that there are a lack of black and brown people that are suffering from the same exact things. Let me
No.
be clear. I don't think that this has anything to do, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a statistician. Like maybe there's stats that this is an opposition, but my feeling is it doesn't matter if you grew up poor or rich. It doesn't matter what kind of a household you grew up in. It doesn't matter if there was more control or less control. I think it's very much in how certain people deal with certain things, certain stress and certain, desire to control their situations and circumstance. So I don't think that there are a bunch of like that this is a white centered problem, but it does seem to be a white centered recovery. Like
Yeah.
that's who you're hearing is getting recovery. That's who's speaking. That's who's, out about it. That's who's going to meetings. And I don't like that.
No, and
Like it can't be good.
no, and I would be so curious to know what the numbers are and
Right.
and actually look at that, and because it does feel like a very white recovery thing, and you go, well, what is that to do, and why is that?
Hmm.
It's a fascinating
Because
question.
it is, and I'm sure there's numbers, and I'm going to do a little research post at B to try to see and find out. I think there is like this idea that like, oh, you know, if you're a certain race that you just don't like, that it's somehow cultural, that like, it would be where, like it would be disrespectful in certain households.
Mm,
But it was disrespectful in my household not to eat your food, and I still found a way to get really controlling about it and fight it because that was one of the main ways that I was able to find control in my household, it being a bit chaotic with alcoholism and whatnot. Like that was my way of finding control. So even though I was able to like do what I needed to do to appease the adults around me, I still found a way to do it. So I'm just hoping I'm hoping that changes, number one, and I am going to look up and see what I can find on it. Uh, so I'm guessing, I'm hoping, because I don't know entirely. I know some of the demographics of who's listening. Like I know age ranges, and I know women to men, and I know like where, but I can't tell what races are listening or what ethnicities are
right.
listening. Um, and I hope that all like everybody is. I hope it's not just white centric because I think there's so much recovery available to people, and I hope that those people can find it. So okay, like in your experience, you had the same experience as me. It's just a bunch of white ladies, right? Just white
Totally.
ladies.
And
Yeah.
like it's interesting because, and it was a lot of like, I guess like for me it was a lot of dancers, and
Okay.
ballet can tend to be very white.
That
Um,
white. Yep.
so it's just like stacking one thing on
And
top of the,
theater.
yeah, it's
Theater's
just
gotten a little better, but it's also still like
very white.
very
Yeah,
historically very white.
yeah. So I think, and you're right, things are changing, and for the better in all departments of, I think, the arts, and expanding viewpoints. But it that was my experience in the mid 2000s.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
And did you feel like there was any part of that that you couldn't relate to or that you thought was different based on
Well,
being like,
it's funny. Like my mom was always dieting. My mom is white. My dad is black. So that just seemed like a normal thing. You know what I mean? Like
right,
in that period of time, like I could tell you every, I mean, diet pill that existed, every, Weight Watchers. Like, so watching somebody diet seemed normal. Also,
right,
you know, very white. And that was a
right,
trendy time, whether it's like,
right.
I love that moment in The Devil Wears Prada where Miranda Priestley explains why the sweater is blue. It's
Right.
very similar in like why, there's a Glamour magazine with, Cindy Crawford on it, and she says, I only eat grapefruits. And then it's like, my mom's at the dentist's office in Connecticut and reading Glamour magazine, and now she's
Hmm.
only eating grapefruits. So then I'm going, well, can I have some grapefruits? Why are you eating only grapefruits? It's like this
Hmm.
trickle down effect that exists can be so detrimental, but start in a very isolated place that has nothing to do with dieting.
Right. And the sweater thing she's talking about at the end, she ends up saying, like, you didn't choose the sweater was chosen for you because the
Exactly.
people who are in charge have chosen it. You think you're exercising free will. In actuality, you are a part of the system that was created for you.
Yes.
I love that. That's very much how it feels like on a lot of fronts.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And the grapefruit thing. Oh my God. I hate grapefruit. I absolutely cannot stand grapefruit. And I remember in the late 90s and early 2000s eating grapefruits. Eating grapefruits. I hate them. They taste like stomach acid to me. I can't even eat them unless I put a pound of sugar on them. And I'd be sitting there eating a grapefruit. Like, this is great. This is
Yes.
great. I love it. This is
Totally.
great. Oh my God. I can't. Oh, okay. All right. Do you, moving far and away and far on to far away from grapefruits. Do you remember anything about some of your early recovery? Like, is there anything that sticks out early in recovery that like you remember struggling with, or that you just kind of remember like, oh yeah, that thing? Because I like to talk about that if anybody can remember it, because I think so often there's like, okay, I had a problem and then I went into recovery and now my life. But there's some really dodgy moments in and around recovery, especially early recovery, that is so hard. And I think we want to skip past them because we don't want to remember them because it's terrible. But I think it might be helpful for people to know about them if you
Yeah,
remember anything.
I think for me, the biggest one was people commenting on how I looked and saying, "Oh, you look so good." And that was really confusing to me because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, depending on when you said that to me in my life, it meant a different thing. Like at one
Mm-hmm.
point, when I weighed 98 pounds, people said, "You looked so good," because it was the perfect ballet body. And then I couldn't maintain that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I gained weight, and then, or like, after recovery, or, in my 20s, when I feel like my body like settled, and people would be like, "You look so good." But it was like, I weigh 20 pounds more than the last time I heard this. And so that was a really scary moment because it felt like a key to unlock another door of like, well, do I need to lose 20 pounds? Like, who's telling me the truth?
Right. Almost like people are placating you that
Yes.
like when it like they're saying the same thing like you look so good, but because you might be gaining weight or becoming a more healthy weight that they're saying you look so good and you're like you're fucking with me. You're just
Yes.
saying that because I'm sick and like you want me to
Totally.
gain weight and
Yes.
I don't want that. So what
Right.
you're saying every time is you look good is that I'm gaining weight.
Yes. And, I think that people commenting on like, even to this day, my family will say stuff like, if we go out to dinner, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're eating," and it's like,
Hmm.
and like not like it's just people not thinking about what they're saying, and like, yeah, I'm restricted because I'm in my mid 30s and I'm a professional dancer. Like, I
Hmm.
cannot be eating cheesecake every
Right.
day. Like, these are the
Right.
things that happen when like you grow up. Like, you just don't do
Right.
that anymore. Um, so I think
Well,
like
and also some
that's
of these things your body starts saying like no, thank you. Like you start getting acid reflux when you
yeah,
eat certain things. As you get
totally.
older, your body starts dictating what you're kind of allowed to have and not.
Yeah, and also like I think when you finally learn what your body, and I think it's a beautiful thing that I always like laugh with, you know, women of my age when I'm like, "Ugh, wasn't it just so nice when your body finally just didn't fluctuate? Like it just
Hmm.
stayed at a number. Like within 3 pounds, 5 pounds, you get your period, right? Like, but like
Hmm.
it stayed there consistently. So you go like, this is where I'm supposed to be, and like
Right, where
there's not
you're.
a fight. I can
Hmm.
still have pizza one night and still go take ballet class the next day, or actually have a drink, or not have a
Hmm.
drink, like so but and all of these things were so restricted at a period of time, and my body just was saying, just give me a little bit here and there and I would be so happy. And
Hmm.
I think that when you finally get to a position of going, ah, this is just where my body lives, it functions at its highest quality. But all that to be said is like, dodging the bullets of people not being conscientious of trigger words around you. And
Okay, and is that because some people like myself too, like I have certain guidelines or abstinence or sobriety that kind of keep you from relapsing into like I'm not allowed to be on diets and every day I want to be on a diet. Like every day like I'm constantly fighting the urge to put myself on whatever weird ass diet I've seen on Twitter, TikTok, like
all the
Instagram,
things.
like whatever I've read, like whatever I think, like I can just think them up in my head too. They can be magical. I can come to my own, sick senses about what I think I should do. So that's something for me that I'm not really allowed to be on diets. I'm not allowed to calorie count. I'm not allowed to have off limit foods because everything for me will eventually become an off limit food.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything like that? You mentioned like trigger words.
Yeah, I don't have anything specifically when it comes to food. I am very mindful of like when I feel like I'm functioning at my best is when I meal prep, and like that's a control thing for me. So
Hmm.
if I can prepare things, then I don't get stuck in a grocery store trying to make a decision between shows. Because that's when I'll be like, yeah, I should just have cookies, and then I'll feel like shit. And then that
Hmm.
can lead to a spiral. So although I don't have specific like bulleted points like you just mentioned, there definitely there's some rock hard things in my head that I'm like, if you put that, if you do that, you know what it's going to do. Knock on. So I
Right.
know the knock on effect when it comes to all of that stuff. So, there are days where I'm like, that was a dumb idea, Chelsey, and you're going to pay for it tomorrow when you don't feel good. Or like when you are feeling kind of shitty about your body, but it never leads to a place of relapse in that sort of way. It just kind of goes, well, that was a dumb day. And
Right.
a dumb thing. You know
Right.
better.
Right. And I think once you get to a certain point, like there is very much like kind of a gentle approach of like, okay, that wasn't the best decision. You know yourself. You kind of know better. I often will not plan foods, and then I go into the same thing, and instead of making a choice of sugar, because I get very weird about sugar and fast food and stuff like that, like I get I start to get into a place where I can't have anything because everything's terrible. And like, I need to, like, I have, so that's why I need to plan my things or know what I have as my safe, what I call safe foods, which is like, I know at Starbucks, there's certain things they're going to have that I always have and I'm fine with it. There's certain things at Target that I know I can go and grab, that I can be okay with. And I'm not going to sit, like you said, and like spin in a grocery store and try to figure out what I'm going to do, which causes like this whole panic situation. So I definitely relate to that. Thank you for bringing that. That's like exactly what I wanted to know because I very much relate to that.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but like if I know I'm going out to dinner, I like to plan. Like, so I don't like people to spring on like, let's go have dinner. That stresses me out. Because I'm very kind of picky about like when I eat, especially around shows and when you're performing. But I often like to like take a look at the menu so I can have an idea. So I will always.
This is a theme. This is a theme. Kevin and I, yes, we have a theme. This has been mentioned. Yes.
So I can just know. I can be prepared. I can act surprised when I get there. But like, I know already what so even if it's like something like I want to plan to indulge more that day to not feel stressed, I'll look the night before. So like maybe, I'll have a healthier breakfast or a lighter breakfast in order to like be like, I'll treat myself in case somebody wants to get dessert or like whatever that is. So it's just like knowing, I think, all the corners of the room is the best way to create the most success for me mentally without making or projecting my feelings on anybody else. Because I think looking back in the past, that's what stressed people out around me. Like I would totally, my behavior of like not being able to make a decision or, feeling incredibly anxious about food would just ruin a lot of things for people, I think, that I didn't even realize that now looking back, it would drive me nuts if I was myself. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes, because I was the same way. And I can't imagine how many times that was like just a nightmare to try to figure out what to eat because everything to me I couldn't deal with. In our kind of community and whatnot, why do you think that more people don't discuss this as an issue? Like for those of you who may not be dancers that listen to the podcast, in the last several years, the dance community has really started speaking up about various inequalities, power imbalances, SA, sexual abuse, and things like that. But I feel like this just kind of gets glossed over and isn't really talked about.
Yeah, I think, it's fascinating. And I think part of why I love theater is because, like, they want to see humans on stage. Like, you can't tell a story with people who don't look like normal people. And, like, not to say that dancers don't look like normal people, but at a certain point, I feel like the aesthetic, we didn't look like normal people. We looked like dancers. And I loved that. I loved looking like a dancer. And if I walked down the street in New York City and someone's like, are you a dancer? I'm like, yes, I am. And I worked very hard to look like this. It's like a proud moment. But the more and more I work on the creative side of stuff, you realize that it doesn't do a service to have people who the audience can't relate to. Now, I think, like, there are certain theater pieces that you do want to go see and say, like, I've also worked for Cirque du Soleil, where it's like you're working with athletes. And they're not, whether there's eating disorders existing there, I'm sure there are, but you're working with athletes who are at their top of their game, and they are talk about focus with diets, with exercise. It's like laser point. But I think it's not talked about because there's actually not a support system put in place. And I think if you're going to talk about it, then you have to talk about a lot of things that were fucked up in the past. Because, now things are switching, and there's a lot of body positivity and, diversity in body types. I know, especially in musical theater, that is something that is trying to exist. But I think the thing that is so complicated about an eating disorder is that you don't have to look a certain way to have it. And, you can be a thin dancer and be in shape and not have an eating disorder. And I could be struggling with my weight, trying to look like you standing next to you and have a serious eating disorder, but I look healthier than you, who is actually healthier than me. So I think it's this very complex mindset that, different than like alcoholism or drug addiction, it's almost unseen, and it's a mental illness. I mean, that's what it is. And so then you're asking to talk about mental illness, which is there's not the infrastructure built in our industry to support that, I don't think.
No.
And
it also, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's like the bigger thing, which is why it's like such a wide net. It's, if it could be isolated, like, do you struggle just with food? You could get a select group of people to talk about it. But like the mental illness behind it and the layers in which within our conversation, we have two very different versions of an eating disorder, combination of a cocktail. And I don't think two people are alike. And I think it would just blow people's mind that if you laid out 15 random people, they would probably all have some sort of an eating disorder. And then how do you diagnose that, and how do you ensure that, and how do you provide help in which it doesn't feel like you're just being shipped off to a rehab or something very general?
Right. I think there's also this connotation with artists and art that mental illness is like kind of welcomed, because being crazy somehow can be like the the birthplace of creative ideals and artistic whatever. And I think that's been across our industry or our community, is like anytime there's been a power imbalance, I think a lot of times it's been written off as someone who's just a crazy genius, or someone who's, their work is just so important. They just don't have time to speak nicely to someone, or not yell, or not throw things. And it's just like so toxic and outdated. And if you think about it, it's just such an easy out, right, for bad behavior. But I think there's also like, not that everyone is with a mental illness is having bad behavior, but I think there gets a lot that gets kind of almost like that it's a rite of passage. Like, to be an artist, you have to be tormented. And whereas I don't know if that's true or not, because I'm tormented. But I think like I had a guest on a week or so ago that talked about like your sickness is your gift, but in its recovery, like it is your greatest gift. It is like your golden goose of creation, but you have to be well enough to create it, like you have to be well enough to create that afterwards. So yeah, it's just something I've been thinking about a bit.
I know that and it's different in industry, right? Like in theater, HR has now been implemented. So
ooh, it's corporate, y'all. Better watch out.
Yeah. So this is a good thing and a scary thing, right? Because it's like a territory that has never existed. But with that being said, it also provides a space to go, I need a mental health day. And I'm not unstoppable. And you have a third party to say, I'm struggling. So I think there is becoming more support. I can only speak for the Broadway community and theater, commercial theater, let's say, through our union of equity. But I think, as if I was going to say, if I was just being a commercial dancer and a dancer, I would feel very lost. And I think there could be a space to have that, but it's a very vulnerable thing because there's a lot of judgment on it. I mean,
right.
It's it's such a wide net again that like, well, what does it mean? And like, what kind of eating disorder do you have? And I think it's just like you open yourself up. Anybody who wants to help is opening themselves up to a door that you don't know what's behind it. Like it's not a specific thing that fits in the box. It's a very complicated thing that is not as dangerous as other addictions, but it certainly has its dangers and is life-threatening at points, and also, can be under the watch. It can be like a functioning alcoholic where you would never know anybody is struggling inside, and they are just functioning daily. And yeah, so I think it's so wide, and I don't know how they can be specific about it. I hope that people can figure something out.
Yeah. I mean, because the push comes to shove it's a way of coping. So, like you're saying, we don't know why, nobody knows why someone is using that as a coping, like what are they using it for? Because it is certainly being used by someone in a moment of disarray, of needing something to cope with some other things that aren't wanting to be dealt with. So it's like that can be super dangerous when you take away someone's only coping mechanism. Like that feels like, well, now I don't have anything. So now I don't know what to do. It can be really, really scary for people, I think, that maybe aren't ready to deal with it or don't have any other skills. Or like you're saying, if you're trying to help someone, like most people who don't have a degree in some kind of therapy and counseling, like don't know how to help someone make that transition or go get help for that thing.
Well, and I think also like, not everybody's therapy is the same, and like even, the best therapist in the world may not be the right thing for you or whatever.
Yep.
And so I think it's a very complicated relationship in order to define. But I think the more, when you messaged me, I was like, huh, like it was like actually like so lovely because there are people who are just in the world who are very successful dealing with these things, and it's not messing with their life. They're functioning, they're doing their thing, and it was like the loveliest thing to see that pop up in my inbox, but like in a way of like, yeah, let's talk about it, like because it's just part of my life. Like I go to work, and it's
right.
not. I think the more you can normalize it, like we are with a lot of other things. So I think it's just like down on the queue that it will eventually.
Right. It's up. It's coming up in the queue. It's coming up next. It's in processing. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think like there's that, but I think the more people can feel just comfortable letting it be in a casual conversation, the less it becomes a problem. I think that's always where the problem lies, is when it's not in conversation. So, maybe somebody will go viral on TikTok talking about it. I don't know.
Yeah. These things definitely, the eating disorders especially thrive in secrecy. I mean, all addictions do, but definitely eating disorders. That's why it was so fucking powerful when you were like, yeah, I struggle from eating disorder. And then you just went about your day. And I was like, holy shit. What did she just say? Like, she just said that. Like, and this is the thing, like, for those of you who might be afraid to get to the other side, there is so much freedom, and there is so much like, I like the only thing I can describe it as is feeling untouchable or like bulletproof. When you out your own truths, no one can out you. No one can out you. They can't say anything that you didn't already say. When you tell your own secrets, it's like instant. You feel instantly untouchable from any kind of blackmail. Not that anyone's blackmailing you, but that can certainly be a feeling when you're living a life of secrecy. So that's been that for me. Like, is there anything that you've gained in recovery that, you would say that you could speak on?
Yeah, I think that it's just like the power of being honest. I think I lied to a lot of people, and I didn't see it as a lie. I didn't even consider it lying. I considered it like protecting myself. So like so selfish and really one-minded about that. But I learned how to be honest, and I also really actually like learned that my honesty would, because of this, was so skewed, and I think you kind of like hit it right on the head, is that like I can only be the person I am today, and like what I've dealt with all of these things, and I'm still doing the thing that I love to do, and I think that just being upfront about it, just like you're like, well, I have 3 Tonys and I am a nominee for an Oscar. It's like, well, you didn't lose the Oscar. You were nominated,
Right.
but you didn't win,
Right.
right? You know, it's like, it's all how you kind of put it. Like, it's not like I didn't screw up my life by having an eating disorder. It's part of me, and but here I am. You want to hire me, and so like, I think it's like you said, it's the power within the word of the honesty and the truth in it, because like lying sucks, and like those lies just became so deep and like crazy.
It takes a lot of energy to remember what you've told, who you've told what to, like what you're like how to contribute to a conversation without saying too much or, like all those things.
Yeah, and like I was so tight. I was so tight about everything. Like it was just like I was wound so tightly, and I don't know. I used to have like really big crying spells because I would just like the entire day I was just like this and could not relax until I got home, and then finally because I wasn't putting on anything, like you said, I didn't have to think about who I was lying to or what I would expose by saying this, and would somebody see me eating this, like all of these things where it's like tick, 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 tick. It was to just be like, yeah, I had a cookie today and I feel fat, but that's fine anyways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm allowed to have a cookie, like, and like
Right.
that's where it is today, and like
Yeah.
not to say I feel fat, but I can have certain feelings and be honest about it and be like, I just don't feel great today. That's it. And I think it is empowering, and I love hearing you say that because, when I started dating again, I remember it was one of the first things I told my partner, and I was like, I just need you to know that this exists in my life. It's not a problem. You will never have to deal with it. Like, it's my own thing, but like, it exists. It comes out, and if it comes out, I deal with it. You don't have to deal with it, but like I would be lying to you from the very beginning if I did not have this conversation with you.
Right.
So yeah, I think honesty is I felt like 15 years younger, I think, when I finally told everybody.
Yeah.
And I think, it's hard because people don't want to believe it. I think there's some people who are like, I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Which is terrifying too. And then I'm like,
right.
Got it.
Right, because that is a way to, I don't have to put that in a box or think about that or see how I relate to that. I'm just going to put that somewhere else and pretend I never heard it and move about.
Yeah.
Moving on. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I have one last question for you. Okay, so I always say that I'm not in the business of giving advice, and I'm trying not to give unsolicited advice to people in my life. But I want to know if maybe you have any suggestion for anybody who might be suffering right now.
Okay. That is so tough.
I know you can think about it. You can think about it for a little bit.
Because I like thinking about when it was the worst, and I didn't want to hear anybody what they had
Right.
to
What
say.
could have gotten you? Yeah, right, right.
And I guess if you could find somebody that does suffer, that is outed, I think that is
Right.
your best way to get to the other side. Because it will make you feel completely normal and everything that you ever thought. And they'll support you even having an eating disorder. If it's not your time to go to the other side and figure things out, they can absolutely understand all of the things that come along with it. And I think that is it was seeing other people and like just feeling normal around them was enough. And then at a certain point I remember me going, I don't want to be like them. I remember my glasses shifted and it was like, that now looks dangerous to me. And it was all I needed. I just needed the perspective, but I needed to get close to it, that it felt like I was still observing somebody else, even though it was me, to then be able to be spun around and go, I would like to back away from this now. Not in a clean way, but it was just like, I knew that was like a good turning point. So I think find somebody who has an eating disorder and who is I don't give advice, right? We don't give advice, but like I would say somebody who is really in a space of recovery in which they can just openly talk about it, because it will never leave them, but they certainly can understand every single thing that you are going through, and can just say, yes, I've experienced that, and ease your mind one less moment and not feel like you've experienced something that nobody has experienced before. I mean, we just talked about it for an hour, and it's like the amount of like cross dissolves that happened with things that, and I didn't even know you were going through all this, at the time that we were working together, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Worst place to have eating disorders in China. So.
Yeah. Oh my God. Because we, just to like get you, like we're on our way off the podcast, but just to tell you, like where we were in China was not like the bougie, the bougie area of China where you had influence of Western culture. We were literally 2 hours outside of Beijing, at least, maybe with traffic 3 hours, and we didn't have access to kind of whatever food we wanted. There was like a weird 7-Eleven a walk from our hotel, and so our morning, noon, and night food was based on what the hotel made, and they made classic Chinese home style, family style food, and it was always kind of the same, and it was always very heavy cooked, greasy, seasoned, all the things. And when we would ask them to make things a certain way, they would say, okay, and then they wouldn't do it. And it just was like, it very much for me got to the point where I just I didn't like the food so much that I just would kind of stop eating or eat very little, which was very normal for me. Like that's an easy thing for me to do. And I was very much in how I dealt with things, which was not great. And so it wasn't great for me, like I feel like after that trip, my nails were like chipping, my hair was like weird, and I don't know, like I can't imagine how other people that might have even had some recovery under their belt, if that was hard or challenging for you at that time. Like, I don't know. I just know that I was cooking noodles in a water boiler in my room, like in a the water heaters that you make tea with. I was like prison cooking in my room because I didn't want the stupid food that they were like. I couldn't eat one more fried piece of pork or whatever. I don't even like pork. So yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I was just eating sugar 24/7. It was crazy. And we didn't have a gym.
Because we were
That's
we
where
were
my
dancing
brain
hard.
Yeah.
We were dancing hard, so you were like really hungry, and I would just want I wanted like nutrient rich foods like salads and like things like that, fruits, and like that was just not what we had available to us. So that was like really throwing me for a loop. Plus I had like all these ideas about certain foods and how I dealt with them, which may or may not have been true. Yeah, it was very challenging. It was very challenging.
It was a good challenge. You could now eat anywhere if you had to.
Yes, yeah, totally. And but the thing about that job that was not challenging was the people on that job was not challenging, not even for a second. There was not one person on that job that I didn't enjoy being around. There was not one person on that job that I didn't love standing by, sitting by, talking to. That was not challenging at all, at all, at all. It was a great
Oh my
group of
God, that
people.
was over 10 years ago. It must be.
I know. Yeah, 2013.
Oh my God.
2013.
Oh my God.
2013. Okay. Anyways, I've taken enough of your time, Chelsey. Arce, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, lending your time on your dark day of all days. I can't thank you enough, and I'm so glad I got to catch up with you. Thank you for coming on Great Maybe.
Thanks for having me.
I have always had the highest respect for Chelsey. She's so talented and so much fun as a person. Part of that respect goes way back to when she first disclosed her eating disorder. I'm so humbled that Chelsey agreed to come onto the podcast and share her journey. I never thought back when I met her and she courageously and nonchalantly shared her truth that 10 years later we would come full circle to this conversation and I'd share my own nonchalant truth. Chelsey's story, although different from mine, still has so many similarities. However, what I can't relate to and never will is the experience of entering spaces where people don't look like me. As a white woman, I can be fairly confident that not only will I see people who look like me, but I can read literature written and published by those same people. And those same people will most likely be my therapists, dietitians, and nutritionalists. The meetings I attend, my race and sex will be well represented, and social media and online culture will echo that experience. This is my privilege, even in the realm of recovery. Much like the second wave feminism movement of the 60s and 70s, it lacked intersectionality. Recovery, therapy, and wellness has a long way to go for inclusivity, equality, and equity. From the National Eating Disorders Association website regarding people of color and eating disorders affect people from all demographics of all ethnicities at similar rates. People of color, especially African Americans, are significantly less likely to receive help for their eating disorders. Black teenagers are 50% more likely than white teenagers to exhibit bulimic behavior, such as binging and purging. In a study of adolescents, researchers found that Hispanics were significantly more likely to suffer from bulimia nervosa than their non-Hispanic peers. The researchers also reported a trend towards a higher prevalence of binge eating disorder in all minority groups. People of color with self-acknowledged eating and weight concerns were significantly less than white participants to have been asked by a doctor about eating disorder symptoms, despite similar rates of eating disorder symptoms across ethnic groups. Women of color in the United States face substantially more stress resulting from their membership in multiple subordinate groups than that caused by acculturation alone. Eating disorders in women of color may be, in part, a response to environmental stress, an example, abuse, racism, poverty. Therefore, given the multiple traumas that women of color are exposed to, they may be more vulnerable to eating disorders. I hope you found something that resonated in my conversation with Chelsey today. If you're listening to this episode and you're realizing that you're more like Chelsey and I than not, welcome. And I hope this helps you take a step in the direction of recovery if you haven't already. You're not alone. Just a reminder for anyone who needs to hear it, you don't need to wait until you're sick enough to get help. In fact, you don't have to be sick at all, just a desire to feel a little better. If you're listening and right now you're struggling with an ED, disordered eating, or other behaviors, welcome. Know that, whatever you're feeling, there are those among us that have probably felt it too. You're not alone. If you're listening because you have someone you love in your life that is suffering or is in recovery for an ED, welcome. You are also not alone. Even having an eating disorder myself, I have not reacted the best I could to others who were struggling before my own recovery. I've attached the do's and don'ts of how to deal with someone suffering in the show notes, as well as how to contact Chelsey and myself, and various links for help and recovery when and if you're ready. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you were able to find something relatable in today's episode. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, this is also a social experiment to see if in telling my story, I can embolden listeners to share their stories. If you'd like me to read your recovery story on this topic, anonymous or otherwise, on the podcast, please email graymaybesstories@gmail.com, graymaybesstories@gmail.com. Thank you to everyone who helped make this Gray Maybe podcast happen. Producer and editor Roderick Barge, cover photo by Jose Perez, music licensed by Pixabay, special counsel Jada Ellingham and Roderick Barge. Special shout out to supporter Patty Olgan. If you'd like to support this podcast, please rate, share, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now.